Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite and president of Venable Park Investment Council Incorporated. Welcome back to the show, Danielle.
Thank you, Jim.
Danielle, this push to get away from real beef and into fake plant-based meat. Even McDonald's now in southern Ontario is going to be experimenting at 28 restaurants with Beyond Meat products. Is this the wave of the future?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the wave of the future. Now, they're not all healthy. They're not all optimal in terms of source of food, but they are, by and large, an improvement over much of the meat systems that we've been using in terms of mass production. So, in McDonald's case, I noticed they're announcing the use of Beyond Beef, Beyond Meat, and they're actually a non-GMO food provider. So in terms of the vegetables that are going into making that particular highly processed food, it is a highly processed food, so it's not ideal. Myself, I prefer a black bean burger or something fresh from legumes. That's what I eat. But in terms of that compared to the environmental impact and even the health impact of a typical beef burger from McDonald's, which could come from hundreds and hundreds of different cow sources and, highly processed and all that sort of thing, it's definitely an improvement. The whole evolution, ground beef is actually the easiest to disrupt because of the fact that it's a very malleable, it's quite easy to replicate the look of that. Steaks are harder, but I think that the precision fermentation movement, which is making proteins out of everything other than animals right now, this is definitely the wave of the future. And there's been a very interesting study which I highlighted on the blog this week from the Rethinks project group, which are a futurist research group, and they did a great project report in 2018 on the electric car evolution and how that was so quickly disrupting the conventional ICE auto industry. And they're doing an update on that, which will be out shortly, and they've been bang on in many of the trends. Now, the pace at which they predict this transformation may be breathtaking to many people. For example, in the case of the dairy industry and the beef industry, they're saying that the switch from the current form of growing cattle to extract protein in the various products that we take from animals, that will be largely disrupted within the next 10 years. And that the implications are then, there may be some boutique production of these, from the old school methodology, but generally speaking, they see the entire food system shifting. And it's very interesting. I know it's a very startling, shocking thought when people first hear these concepts. I think they reject them and think that they sound like pseudoscience or madness, we've never done it that way sort of thing. But one of the history of food, it's very important to realize that we sort of have gone through these different evolutions, and that fermentation as a process was developed, 1,000 years ago, and it allowed us to do a whole bunch of things like, protect or can make pickled items, make things like alcohol, and it was a way of taking food and making it have a longer duration or application. And that was sort of the first, they call it the macro. They didn't understand how necessarily the science was working, but people figured out ways and applications to produce and preserve food in a healthy way that didn't make people sick, generally speaking, although oftentimes, things go wrong and you can get mass sickness out of certain types of food preparation. But this next innovation is on a micro level, and it's because we can now direct on a molecular level the construction. So just one example, which I thought was really poignant, is that, the whole dairy industry, and I was writing about that this week, because the dairy industry, of course, is an enormous lobby in Canada, and there's a lot of subsidies that go to the dairy industry. We've heard a lot about this in the latest NAFTA negotiations in the last year or so. But the reality is it's a highly unproductive way. Growing a whole dairy cow is a very unproductive way in order to produce that kind of protein. So if you look at the constituent elements of milk, solid proteins, casein and whey, make up just over 3% of that. And the bulk of it, more than 87% of it is water, some sugars, 3% fat, and a tiny bit of vitamins and minerals. So if you look at, what are we trying to do in feeding the world? Well, we're trying to produce healthy inputs that are widely available so that we have great nutrition for, what is going to be bumping up against 10 billion people by 2050. And so the current ways in which we do it, which takes most of the land in, for example, North America, is used for cash crops, which are produced drenched in pesticides for mass production, very unhealthy, very bad for water and habitat and animal life, and even for the farmers, frankly, who are very often forced to have massive scale with a tiny little, modicum of profit coming off. It serves the large corps better than it serves anything else. And that way of producing these nutrients is very highly inefficient. Takes tons of water, tons of energy, tons of fertilizer. So again, none of these things are considered very efficient. And when you look at the way that they can grow these sort of almost like a 3D printing version of food, where you take the constituents and you put it through, like an algorithm comes up with the formula, and then you can actually have this stuff produced locally, and you can make it into whatever form you want. So you could reconstruct the look of a steak. And people think, oh, this sounds crazy, but if you think about what the constituents of food are, as you know, once we eat food, and if you ever see food after it's been eaten in one way or another, it all looks the same, right? It's not, so all this sort of cosmetic stuff about how and what way you get these nutrients is something that can be easily replicated in a million different ways and much more efficient than what we're presently doing. So the implications are huge, and this is why I think it's very behooving of people to be open to this, because, if this is happening now, and it is, I go back to 10 years ago, no one thought anyone would have an electric car, and now you see them all the time, right? No one thinks that this kind of food production is likely, but I think that, from all the progress that's being made right now and all the reports, and there's many people who are studying this, are saying within 10 years we're going to have a massive disruption in agriculture, both in the animal-based agriculture and in the cash crop system, and it's going to have a big impact on the people who are doing that work right now, on the companies that are having that as a business model, on the land, and how we use it. And the upside here is that it'll allow us to use the land for a whole bunch more productive things, like carbon sequestering, for example, like tree farming. Sometimes some of the constituents that we need for feeding people rather than feeding animals. So all that is a good news story, but it takes a lot of getting your head around, and you have to sort of be open to it.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after this.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF.
surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines. Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park, still talking about alternative ways to produce food. What about vertical farming? We have shopping malls being abandoned in both Canada and the U.S. You could stack up all kinds of vegetable products and grow them there. And a relative of mine in London uses shipping containers where they grow fish and vegetables. The fish waste is used to fertilize the vegetables. And again, you can stack them up behind the local restaurant or supermarket, and you have fresh fish and fresh vegetables all year round.
Sure. I mean, that sounds a lot more efficient than most of the things people are doing. Now local family farms are still feeding a huge amount of the population in the world, especially in other countries. It's really just in places like North America that we've had this mass production model that's really taken over in the last 30 years. So anything that, in the go forward world, everything is going to be about units of expended energy and resources for unit of nutrient extracted. And doing that efficiently means that we have to waste a lot less and do it in a much more focused way, right? So I think that over time there won't be any need to grow and kill a fish. You'll just be able to make the nutrient itself and then use it in whatever food you're preparing. So, I don't think that there's any one solution, and I'm not saying this is a quick fix, but I'm saying that it is rapid fire right now for a whole bunch of reasons, right? Not just environmental, although that's huge, not just in terms of better resource utilization because we have this growing population in the world and the realization that things are under stress. We can't keep clear-cutting everything for cattle grazing and soybean and palm oil and all these things that are in mass production right now and really responsible for a lot of the deforestation that's going on at a time when we need to start growing trillions more trees. This is a huge part of taking the climate out of the air. But we can go back to, paying farmers, for example, to grow trees instead of paying them to grow destructive crops. And it can be a more healthful model for everyone involved. Also, if you look at the sick care costs of the current system, it is mind-boggling how much money, trillions of dollars, are being wasted, again, benefiting things like pharmaceutical companies, but devastating for the population in terms of health, quality of life, how many diseases are becoming rampant through our population, all because people are eating mass-produced cheap calories, which are actually costing us a fortune when you factor in all the other full-cost accounting of the harm, the emissions, the pollution, the sickness that's spreading. We really can't afford to continue like that. So it's just it's also a cautionary tale, frankly, for the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry is really being whacked on all sides here because not only is there this general shift in sentiment away from it as a primary energy source and all of these initiatives taking off across the world in terms of, pledging for 100% renewable energy and investing in all these alternatives, but also if you look at the other things that fossil fuels are primarily used for, not only energy, but also fertilizers, which, as I say in these new reports, they're suggesting is going to be collapsing in the order of about 50% in terms of the decline in usage over the next decade and 15 years out. So that's another source of revenue for them, which is taking a big hit. And thirdly, you've got the fact that 99% of the plastics in the world right now are made from fossil fuels as well, which are also going through a period of mass repulsion, where everyone is becoming very aware that they are toxifying our water systems. Their particulate is now in the air. It's being found in ice in the Arctic. There was another study this week that I put on the blog where, those very fancy silk, they look like silk tea bags, and you can get them for special kinds of tea. Well, in fact, those are not silk tea bags. Those are made from plastics. And there's a McGill University study that discovered that when you brew a cup of tea with that, you're actually getting tiny micro molecules of plastic in your cup of tea, which you're then ingesting. Right. So this once people understand the magnitude of this, another little incidental thing that came out of that study was they took water fleas and they gave them the water that had been infused with these plastic particulate, which is about the size of the food that they eat. And they discovered that when they ingested it, the water fleas went kind of crazy. They didn't die, but they became incredibly erratic in their behavior. And so, you connect all of this with perhaps the mental health crisis that seems to be sweeping the land in terms of young people and depression and anxiety disorders, which are impacting the productivity of our workforce, not to mention just the health and stability of the population. And I think that people are really starting to connect these dots. It matters what we use for containers. It matters what we throw into the ground and water systems. It matters what we put in our bodies. And all of these things are really coming up for sober reflection. The businesses that have really been dominant in terms of, what sectors have really been the big profit makers over the last couple of decades, and now a realization that they've caused so much harm and that they're leaving the cleanup for the public purse. And I think all those factors together mean we're at the sort of in the midst of a monumental shift. And so I say better to keep your eyes open and be aware, and so that every public policy decision we make, every investment decision we make as investors, as business owners, and as consumers should be trying to keep in line with this momentum rather than throwing good money after bad or trying to double down on old technology, trying to subsidize dying industries. We really have to focus on where the future's headed.
We'll have more with Danielle Park right after this.
Grand Portage Resources' Herbert Gold Project in southeast Alaska highlights increased gold resource, indicated and inferred, of 860,000 ounces, in excess of 10 grams per ton gold. Expansion drilling is planned on the Herbert Gold property for the summer of 2019. Grand Portage Resources trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Danielle Park. Danielle, on your blog, Juggling Dynamite, you had an article about Canadians are incredibly wasteful. What are we wasting and what could we be more efficient with?
Well, again, that's not my data, but that is the facts about energy consumption in Canada and North America in general. The United States is about as bad, but we're actually very intensive. We consume per capita, because there's not that many folks here in Canada, as you know, about 36 million people in this big country of ours, but per capita we consume 5 times more energy than the global average. And when it comes to natural gas, about 5.8 times the amount of natural gas. And you may say, well, isn't that because we have, bad winters? And that's not true, because many other countries have bad winters too. But the reality is 51% of the energy that we're consuming is actually being used by the energy sector itself, which is creating that energy. So 51% of it is being used to make things like oil and gas refining, pulp and paper chemicals. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling business model for those sectors. But if we're moving away from, giving them subsidies, for example, and we're having a more level playing field for all these other businesses which are doubling down on alternatives to that stuff, what you could see is that Canada's consumption could drop precipitously just by, creating new energy sources. Or more like developing the ones that are present already in the world. And then when it comes to our residential and commercial use, 14% of what we consume is there. And I noticed that a lot of the political platforms which are being rolled out recently are about how to get Canadian homes more efficient. And I think this is absolutely essential. If you think about it, how have we grown or conducted our finances over the past 20 years, it's been primarily doubling down on bigger housing, more expensive housing, but very little to do with efficiency or how to save cash flow, right? Very much about how do we add debt to make people afford things that are unaffordable. In this post-bubble world, when we can no longer continue to add more debt and people become very focused on how do I, have a better quality of life, how do I waste less and save more, the focus becomes how can I spend less on things like food, energy, transportation. And this is where the consumer becomes very focused on efficiency of their cash flow. And that is where we, because it's very difficult in this environment to dramatically or quickly increase cash flow. Clearly, we have had stagnant wages for the masses for the last 20 years. Part of that is globalization. Part of that is automation. Part of that is the way that the corporate structure has gone. Now, in this environment, what there's going to be much more focus instead of, the central banks keep talking about how do we manufacture inflation in this environment. It's very difficult to do, obviously, because they've been trying for a long time here with all sorts of monetary policies to try and create inflation out of thin air. And in this low-wage, flat environment, it's very difficult. Also because we have such excess capacity left over from the credit bubble over the last couple of decades. So now it's very difficult for investment in some of these old business models, and all the opportunity are in more of the startups and new areas. So anyway, for all those reasons, it's hard to get a big increase in income. And the focus has to be how do we, therefore, free up more cash flow. And there's going to be more and more constraints on government revenues, like because there's so much demand for hyper investment to transition in this big move forward in our economy and our businesses. And it's going to be capital intensive for businesses too. So no one really can afford to waste in this brave new world. And so it's going to be much more about how do we lower the cost. So this idea of, electrifying the grid, getting cheaper energy, wasting less and polluting less will all help make a lot less cost in that sector. Also, when it comes to our houses, more efficient windows, doors, heating systems. There's so much data right now. Every day there's a deluge of reports about the poisonous impacts of air pollution in home and businesses, for example, which is causing like tens of thousands of deaths every year in just North America. Children, asthma and various respiratory diseases that are coming from the equipment and materials we're using in homes. Again, if we can pick healthier inputs, we will waste less, and we will have less suffering, and we will have more strength. So all of that is, again, this is not pie in the sky. This technology is here, and it's being rolled out in various countries. So we need to align government incentives to promote that behavior and that kind of investment. And then businesses already see the business case there. At least the ones that are not, completely paralyzed by their antiquated models where they have to do a lot of transformation. But the ones that are sort of more nimble and able to go where the puck's going in this environment, they're already doing it, and they see lots of growth. So it's really actually a very exciting story, but governments have a role to play in helping to train and transition, to incent the right behaviors, to incent things like electric cars over fossil fuels, and the people that are in those old industries, don't want to hear that, want to hear that we're going to bail them out or hold them up. And I'm all for giving money to retrain and retrofit and help us make this transition. And that means helping people from old sectors retrain and find employment in the new growth areas, for sure. And so I'm all for that. I'm just not for giving money to support bad, destructive habits and models.
Danielle, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, thank you.
My guest has been Danielle Park, editor of the popular blog Juggling Dynamite. If you have any questions for Danielle or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.